Greetings, internet friends. AJ here from 8-Bit Horse, and I think it's time we talked about Silent Hill. It's the year 2000, the world didn't end, and I had just moved to Florida. Fortunately, my friend and gaming pal Nathan had also just moved to Florida, so a big chunk of my life was carved out for video game time. At this point in my adulthood, my budget for video games was $50 per month, so I could afford to buy one brand new game every month, or I could go down to Electronics Boutique and browse the used PS1 games, and those were $15 a piece, so I could get 3 of them for about the same price. And in 2000, the PS1 was still the big system, so the selection of used games cycled out pretty regularly. Nathan and I would frequently go game hunting together. We'd go down to EB Games, flip through the game cases, sometimes flip them over and read the ludicrous marketing descriptions on the back of the box, but ultimately we'd usually walk out with 3 games apiece. But because the PS1 library was so large at this point, there was just no way for us to be familiar with all of the games, everything we were getting ourselves into. So sometimes we brought home some really fun games, and sometimes we brought home some real stinkers. It was kind of like buying games in the 8 and 16-bit era, right? You were mainly going off the back of the box to figure out what you wanted to buy. But that is how I found Silent Hill. In fact, this is the copy I bought on that day about 20 years ago. It still has the residue in the corner from peeling off the EB Games price sticker. Now, when I read the back of this case, the impression I got was it was kind of a horror-themed adventure game. And I hadn't played an adventure game in a long time, so that sounded like something I would have a good time with it. Plus, it has the Konami Twin Ribbon logo down there in the corner, so I figured it would at least be decent. Now let me tell you that I did not understand that there was such a thing as survival horror as a genre. Like, I had played the original Resident Evil when it came out, and I look at that as more of a take on B-movie horror than anything else. Like, the game starts up with a live-action FMV sequence. It's just filled with bad acting and bad dubbing and cheap effects. And then the game itself starts up and the goofy dialogue just continues, bad acting, this weird echo effect to everything. And, I mean, it had some scary moments, right? Like the zombie that turns around and looks at you at the beginning and a few other things like that. But it was mostly jump scares, and the game's focus on solving these just really obtuse puzzles never really made it that like immersive a horror experience for me. I felt like it was horror in the same way that George Romero's Dawn of the Dead was horror. There are a few scary moments, there's some gore here and there, but it's not a pervasively horrific experience. But for me, that all changed with Silent Hill. When you boot up this game, the very first thing you see is a warning message that says there are violent and disturbing images in this game. Like, this immediately sets a completely different tone than Resident Evil. This is like a public service announcement saying, like, the content you are about to see may not be appropriate for all audiences. Like, you may not want to play this game. After this warning message, the game goes into a lengthy CG introduction, showing some of the characters, and eventually leads up to Harry Mason driving his Jeep down a mountain road at night with his daughter Cheryl in the passenger seat. A motorcycle cop pulls up beside them and then passes by. Not long after that, Harry notices a crashed police motorcycle on the side of the road. Further up ahead, the Jeep comes around a corner and there's what appears to be a dark-haired schoolgirl walking in the middle of the street. Harry swerves to avoid hitting her, and the scene fades out, revealing the start menu. When you start the game, you pick up right where the intro left off. You see Harry wake up in his crashed Jeep. He looks over and sees that Cheryl's missing and the passenger side door is open. Harry steps out of the Jeep to look for her and eventually sees a figure of a little girl off in the distance. As you play, you catch a couple of glimpses of the little girl, which eventually leads you down this long alleyway behind a row of houses and through an iron gate. And here's where things get really creepy. When you walk through the gate, the camera angle immediately changes to an overhead view. The game's fully 3D, which is great because I hated the fixed camera angles in Resident Evil, but this camera shift completely takes you out of the typical over-the-shoulder perspective and instead shows Harry as small and distant. Like, he even blends into the background a little bit and it takes you a moment to realize where he's standing. But this camera shift not only takes you out of the comfort of seeing the world from your own perspective, It's also meant to frame this mass of blood and guts in front of you that looks like the remains of some brutally killed animal, but you can't quite make out what it is. This is also when you start to hear an air raid siren going off. You start walking toward the camera, and then you leave the scene and have another fixed overhead shot showing you from behind. And then something happens that I had never experienced in a video game before. You're walking along toward the camera, which starts to tilt at an angle and actually pulls itself backwards and up along the side of a building before pushing back down to focus on you walking away. The camera just keeps taking these unsettling and unexpected turns as you move from scene to scene, making you less and less comfortable as you go along. And then things get really strange. It starts to get dark all of a sudden, and you're walking around by matchlight. You come across a broken wheelchair with one of the wheels still spinning, and then a hospital gurney with a blood-soaked sheet covering a body. You start walking along this long, rusty chain-link fence, and there's blood all over. You eventually come across an eviscerated corpse strung up on chains.
What is this? What's going on here?
A few seconds after you see this, these small, childlike creatures come out of the darkness and start stabbing you in the legs. They just keep coming at you, and they keep attacking. You can't fight back, you try to get away, but you can't. And you're eventually killed by these creatures. And then you wake up in an abandoned diner like nothing ever happened. I had never experienced anything like this before in any medium, let alone video games. This game goes from mildly creepy to gory to completely unhinged from reality in a matter of minutes. Stepping into Silent Hill is a transformative experience, both for Harry and for the player. It exposes you to horror that's physical and psychological, and you're not some kind of soldier or secret agent. You're just a regular guy looking for his daughter. This seems like a thing that could happen to you. So let me tell you how I played this game. When I first moved to Florida, I was working second shift. So I got off work at 11 o'clock at night, and I got home around about 11:30. And my wife worked even later than I did. She got home around about 1:30 in the morning. So that gave me around about an hour and a half to play undisturbed in my apartment, alone, at night, after everyone else had gone to sleep. And of course I played with the lights out. I should probably also mention that I get really drawn in to video games and movies and other things when they're done really well, especially with video games because I'm the one controlling the character. I don't know how this works for everyone else, but when I'm playing a game, I feel the real world around me kind of just darken and disappear, drop away. And I feel like I'm sort of submerged in that experience. That's all that is around me. I'm part of that world. So there were times where I was playing Silent Hill, and I was so immersed in the experience that, sometimes my buddy Nathan would give me a call, because he kept late hours too. And when the phone rang, I would scream. I was so into that world, and this loud noise happening would pull me out, and I would just scream at just being scared of this violent sound. And the same thing would happen if somebody in the apartment building slammed their door, or if my wife came home early. I was that engaged, that immersed in that experience. Once I got done with my 90-minute gameplay session, I would turn on the lights, and then I needed to find something to bring my mind back into reality. I'd turn on the TV and look for the most boring television program I could find, usually the news or something like that. And I needed to watch 10 minutes of boring TV for every hour that I had played the game, just to bring me back to the world. I couldn't even walk around the apartment because my brain was still sort of partly occupying Silent Hill. I was expecting to see those kinds of things in reality. So I had to do this exercise of watching boring TV to make my brain just mundane and ordinary again. And there were times in the game where I didn't even get a full 90 minutes. I just got too scared to keep going on. I remember in particular in the school, they've got the little childlike things with the knives. And I just remember the second story, there was something in the second story of that building that scared me so much that I just couldn't bring myself to go up there. I legitimately thought I wouldn't be able to finish the game because I was too scared to go up onto the second floor. I eventually did it a little at a time, like I do like a little chunk and then come back downstairs and save and then do it on another day. So I eventually made it past that section, but even then, like in the game, there were some just legitimately frightening moments. Once I finally beat the game, it became less scary. Like I kind of got used to everything, and I eventually went back and replayed several times so I could see all of the different endings. But that initial gameplay experience definitely left a lasting impression on me. So how about it? What was your very first survival horror gaming experience, and did you love it? Did you fall in love with the genre, or did it end up being too much for you? Let me know down in the comments. In the meantime, thank you for joining me for Story Time with the Old Man of Gaming, and we'll see you next time.